Papers now here in France, as ever at this time. Going to start with Le Parisien has an interview with Edouard Philippe, the new French Prime Minister, 3 weeks after he was named as the French Prime Minister, covering a whole range of topics, aren't they, Flo? Including the upcoming parliamentary elections. Of
course, round one is this Sunday. Let's take a look at the front page of Le Parisien with this quote from Edouard Philippe. "I want a stable and powerful majority." Well, polls suggest that La République En Marche, so Emmanuel Macron's party, is going to win a comfortable majority in these parliamentary elections, thus giving the government an opportunity not to have to share power and essentially having an easier time implementing the government's program.
One particular part of that programme in the spotlight these days, just mention it, how the government plans on reforming France's labour code. Now, yesterday that plan was presented to worker and business representatives, wasn't it?
Indeed, and in fact, if we take a look inside the interview, well, inside the paper, inside the interview, he comes back on that issue. Now, according to Edouard Philippe, the current labour laws are more a source of complexity and headaches for employers than a source of protection for workers. Now, this is, of course, a very touchy subject here in France, to say the least, and Edouard Philippe essentially is trying to reassure worried trade unionists in this interview. He says this project will be a team effort. It will be a dialogue. All partners involved will be listened to and respected.
Fears on the left, though, that the government's going to try and push this through Parliament without having to go through Parliament, rather sort of bypassing Parliament.
Well, Macron has promised that he wants to move very fast on these reforms, and in fact, as soon as this summer, he wants to try and push forward with what is called ordonnance. Now, it's an order. It's not really an executive order, but it essentially allows the government to push a measure through Parliament with relative little resistance. And as you can imagine, this is quite alarming to quite a few people, and once again, Edouard Philippe has been on a mission to reassure people, to explain just what these ordonnances are going to mean. And so you can see that on the front page of the Catholic paper here, La Croix. What are these ordonnances going to be? Well, they will be negotiated. According to La Croix, the government wants to concentrate once again on dialogue, not confrontation. And in fact, Les Echos, the business paper, picks up on this detail as well. You can see here they're talking about how the government is very open to dialogue, very open to discussion, and for now at least wants to avoid any decisive, any thorny issues. All those have been put on the side. Critics might say sugar-coated.
Going to be a little bit difficult, though, isn't it? I mean, the last time the government tried to reform the labour code, the unions were out in the streets, weren't they?
Well, you might remember that was about a year ago, and those protests actually turned quite violent at times. And so that's why we're seeing all this smooth talk, reassuring words come from Edouard Philippe. You can see this described here in Aujourd'hui en France, Le Parisien. So there's the fact that he wants to avoid any kind of confrontation in the streets, but also, of course, that key election that's coming up. We're just a few days away from the first round of the parliamentary elections that are going to determine the future of Macron's presidency. And so all this, according to Aujourd'hui en France, Le Parisien, is a very well-timed charm operation coming from the government. And so you can see that the title here really says it all. The government is pampering trade unions, ... for now, because of course we're going to have to see what comes afterwards.
Yeah, it really does seem like Philippe is trying to reassure people here. Macron, though, really wants to move quickly, doesn't he?
Macron is also very well aware of timing. According to Le Figaro, he's kind of in a grace period right now. Everyone loves him. Everyone's willing to give him a chance, and so he's in a grace period. And also, traditional parties are very weak. And so this is kind of a perfect storm that he's trying to take advantage of to push through these very conflictual or potentially conflictual reforms. And as I said, he wants to do so as soon as this summer. So the timing is very, very quick. And on the front page of Le Figaro, they're also focusing on the fact that, no matter how reassuring the government tries to be on how there's going to be a dialogue and everyone's going to be, consulted about this reform, it's going to be explosive. You can see here on the front page of Le Figaro, they're talking about a social big bang now, because it's not just about reforming the labor code. Macron also wants to reform the unemployment benefit system and the retirement system here in France, the pension system. All these are very explosive dossiers, one after the other. But Le Figaro says, look, this is a very ambitious plan, and so they actually applaud Macron for wanting to push this through.
Okay, well, other papers perhaps not so thrilled here. Flo's found they're not really buying the government's sweet talk of dialogue.
Let's take a look at the front page of Libé. They're talking about that get ready for an earthquake, essentially.
Wow.
Get ready for this earthquake about labor reform. The government is talking about peace and love and dialogue, but according to Libé, at least, the government isn't really showing its true cards, the cards in its hand. In fact, you see that document on the front page of Libération. What is that document? Well, Libération got their hands on documents from the Ministry of Labor that, according to Libé, prepares a much more radical plan. So that's what the government is really preparing. Now, for L'Humanité, which is the communist paper, the reassuring plan is already bad enough. So you can see on their front page, they're talking about how now that we know Macron's true plan, well, the real campaign can start. Of course, they should get going because the first round is in just a couple days. But let's end on something that's not politics. A word on France's favorite astronaut, Thomas Pesquet. He gave a press conference yesterday. Now, he spent 200 days in space, but he still has a lot to say about what happened while he was away. And there's one thing that he's upset about, and that's the fact that the U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. You can see it here in the Huffington Post. Apparently, he brought a copy of the Paris Climate Agreement into space with him.
Right.
And he says some politicians might want to make a trip to space so they can see firsthand the effects of climate change. Perhaps he's talking about Donald Trump. Perhaps people would want Donald Trump to spend some time in space. He can still tweet from there, though. So we'll
I'm
see.
sure he would still manage to tweet, wouldn't he? Those early morning tweets and late evening tweets. Tweet all day. All right, thank you, Flo. Flo with the papers on France 24.